So you own investment property, you're now an investor, and you find out through one way or another that the rent is $5, $10, $20, $30, $40, $50 lower than what it should be. Why did this happen? Who's to blame? And what can you do about it? That's what we're going to talk about this week. So is the property manager, your property manager, just lazy, or is there something behind that that's causing that rent not to stay up with at least where the market should be? Well, it could be as simple as that, or it could be a little bit more complicated than that. So the best opportunity and when to do this is when the lease comes up for renewal with the current tenant, or you're putting a new tenant in. Well, the problem is when the lease comes up for renewal, a lot of property managers take the quickest and the easy way out. The rent is X, they send out a new lease agreement to the tenant, same price, tenant sends it back, job's done for the property management. It's the easiest way for them to do that job, but not necessarily the best for you. What we do as a company, we do a full rent review at that point in time. My staff goes in the system, looks at what the rent is currently, looks at comparable properties, but also looks at the demand. Right now, we have a huge demand on the rental market, so the rental values on paper look like this, but we can actually ask this much more and get it. So that's one of our jobs as a property manager, or one of the girls' jobs that work for me as a property manager, to make sure we're looking at getting you the most amount of money, even though that takes a little bit more work. So now that the trick is we have to balance, there's a few things we have to balance here. We have to look at the current tenant that's in place. So if we're renewing the lease, are they a good tenant? Are they looking after your property? Are they not too nitpicky? Are they paying the rent on time? And do we think we can raise the rent? And if so, by how much? So we have to look at all those factors, because what we don't want to do is have a vacancy, have that tenant move out and not be able to rent the property for any more, or even have a vacancy for any extended period of time, because that's money you've lost. So the property manager's job is to look at all these variables and balance them up, and then say, yes, I think we can raise the rent this amount. Now, ultimately, it's your decision on what you want to do. Some of our owners, we find, really like our tenants, and they don't want to raise the rent because they like them. Well, that's our job. Our job is emotional detachment. So we can still like the tenant, we can still treat them with respect, but we can also make sure they're paying at least the market rent for the property. A lot of people that manage the properties themselves fall into this trap of liking the tenant, and then they find it hard to raise the rent. We don't have that problem. We show a lot of respect, but we also know the bottom line is making sure you get your money, at least what that property's worth, every single opportunity that we can do that. Again, which is typically at the lease renewal or when we have a vacancy. The other little trick here that our property managers try and do all the time, if the owner allows us, is every time we renew the lease, we always raise the rent a little bit. Even if the market can't sustain it, or even if we can't prove it by the market, we still just raise it a little bit, even if it's $5. We want the tenant to get used to every lease renewal, the rent being raised, because then it doesn't seem like a big thing to them. Now, the problem is if your property manager is not on top of this and you go a couple of years without raising the rent, now the rent should be here and it's here. This big gap, the tenant has a pretty good argument against you with the RTA, that's the Residential Tenancy Authority, as to why you should not be allowed to do that big jump in rent. So again, little increases all the time that we renew the lease, or even built-in rent increases. So if we do a 1-year lease, 6-month mark, we're going to raise the rent by $5 a week. Virtually no tenant will complain about that, because $5 a week, $20 a month, that's not a very big expense in the scheme of things, and it's much cheaper than just moving out of the property and having to move out and re-rent and everything else that goes with it. Now, what's interesting is at the moment, we're in, September 2020, the rental market has a huge demand on it here in the Sunshine Coast. So we have this many people wanting rentals and this many rentals. So because of that, what we're finding, us personally, Rouse Realty, is we're finding tenants offering more than the rent amount. So if the rent amount is $500, we have tenants offering $530. Now, it's illegal for us to put tenants into a bidding situation. We're not allowed to do that. But if a tenant freely offers to pay more, we can certainly take that. And if they meet all our other criteria, that's what we do for our clients, is we try and get that maximum rent, even if it's higher than what the market actually shows us. So to wrap that all up and put it in a nutshell, as the famous philosopher Austin Powers once said, the biggest issue with the rent not staying with the market is a lazy property manager. Not the good property managers, I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about the lazy ones. The ones that don't want to do that extra little bit of work and want to take a shortcut and just renew the lease or just put the first and quickest tenant in they can. So it's really important that your property manager, hopefully us, is doing that job and going above and beyond to make sure that your investment not only has the best tenant that's looking after your property, they're paying the highest possible rent, and you're keeping up with the market. So that's it. Please, if you're an investor, even if you're a seasoned investor, this happens to seasoned investors also, call us if you just want a health check done on your property. We're happy to look at it, no obligation, to see if the rent that you're getting is what you should be getting. Call us, no charge, I mean it.